Hey, this is Brighter Rays, and we are looking at a study called The Place of God. This is part 3 here, and we are looking at Genesis 30. Today we're looking at 3 through 13. So last time we looked at verses 1 and 2, now we're looking at 3 through 13. And this little section is called the wrestling match, and you'll see why. If you read the Bible, you'll see why. It actually talks about it there. So first, let's look at the fact that Rachel is forgetting history here. Now, Rachel goes back to the great matriarch Sarah for what she does next. Really, she goes back to Sarah's plan. She offers her servant Bilhah as a concubine wife for Jacob. So what does she do? She's running off with Sarah's playbook. You know, I can't have kids, so maybe I'll use my servant to give me kids. And that was something that people did in the culture back then. I've actually read of descriptions of it where, like, the wife was there with the concubine as actually physically, next to, or maybe they intertwine them, so their legs are somehow. So that when the child is born, it's actually coming out onto the real wives, not the concubine wives, on her knee. So it's a very symbolic kind of sense, like this person is just giving me children. It's a crazy thing, crazy cultural thing. I'm sure a lot of women are glad we don't do that anymore. But that's what happened. So Rachel gives Bilhah to Jacob for a concubine. And Leah, though she was up until that point, showing a strong faith and understanding of who God is and his ways and his desires, what does she do? She offers her servant Zilpah to Jacob as a concubine wife. Not as a full-fledged wife, because we see that she's not full-fledged wife because their children are actually theirs. The children belong to Rachel and Leah. So that means they're only concubines. They're just basically a baby incubator. So, crazy what's going on here. You think, Leah and Rachel, well, especially Leah, has already, extolled God, praised God for giving her children. But then when she sees Rachel giving her servant, then she's like, oh, I'll give my servant too. I don't get it. We can't see into the brains of these women and what they're thinking, but it's messed up. It is a messed up story. This is not the way to do it. And I can, I wasn't thinking about, but the idea of concubinage and multiple wives and all that kind of stuff, God never intended. I don't want to say it that way. God does not want a man to marry more than one woman. None of these patriarchs, even though like Abraham and Jacob both have multiple wives, it's never supported, it's never encouraged in the Bible. If you look at all the instances of a man marrying multiple women, it never works out good. And there's not a good story. There's always problems with it. There's always issues because God didn't intend marriage to be that way. It's man's messed up view of marriage. It's man's sin that has corrupted marriage. And so, when we look at this is not something to follow. That's why it's like the LDS church went back to this idea and like, oh, it's the patriarchs did it, so it must be good. No, it's not a good thing. They're not extolled for this. It's not praised for this. Look at what happens to David, Solomon, all these guys. All these guys that had multiple wives, it destroyed them. It didn't work out good. It was a problem. God might have used it and he might brought good things out of it, but it was a problem in their lives. It was not a good thing in their life. So you just need to keep that in mind as we're reading through this. A narrative, a narrative description of what's going on does not often mean that's approving that. It's just saying this is what happened. Obviously God's not approving of what Rachel and Leah are doing here, but this is a truthful telling of what actually happened. This is history. So, back to the study here. So now we have, Bilhah and Zilpah going to Jacob, and Jacob agrees to this arrangement. Is he a moron or what? It's like, surely Jacob knew the story of Abraham, and how he took Hagar, his wife's servant, to be his wife, and the complete disaster that resulted. It caused all kinds of problems in his life for a long time, right? And so he should have learned from history. Surely Jacob had heard the creation mandate. He knew that man shall leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That's the creation mandate. Either Jacob acquiesces to the request of his wives, or he thinks this is a good arrangement. Either way, this will only bring about more trouble for himself and his family. Sin often follows sin, but Jacob, who had already sinned by taking Rachel as his wife, now is ready to compound the trouble. He should, once he had Leah, he said, well, I got one life now, I got to care for her, she's my wife. Yeah, he had this great love and all this kind of stuff. He loved deeply Rachel, but after he married Leah, that should have been it. He shouldn't have taken Rachel for his wife. It only caused problems for him, and it only caused problems for him in the future. So, God, these people were intending these things for evil. This is not a good way to go. But God will work it out for his good, for their good and for God's purposes. And kind of like with Joseph, which came about because of Rachel. God used Joseph for his plan and purpose. But there's nowhere where these actions that these people are taking are ever said, well, that was a good thing to do. So God will use evil. But yeah, so that's interesting. So let's look at the baby battle that is going on here. So Rachel gives Jacob Bilhah as a wife and then claims the children as her own. The complete disregard for the Bilhah and Zilpah, arrangement here and all this, the disregard for these two women by Rachel and Leah is quite disturbing. The children that the two servant women would be their own. They would have, Zilpah and Bilhah would have no legal rights to these children. They would not even be allowed to name their own children. They are only vessels to bear children for the two sisters. Rachel names the first son of Bilhah, Dan, which sounds like the word judged, because she said that God has judged her and gave her a son. What she's saying is that God has judged her in the right and has approved her by giving her a son. We should never use God's kind providence as a justification for our sin, which is basically what she's doing here. She's saying, well, God, I got a child, so that means God must be on my side. That's a dangerous place to go. That is very dangerous. The second son is called Naphtali, which sounds like wrestling, because Rachel feels that she has gotten a leg up on her sister in the baby war. She thinks that she's wrestling with her sister in this, and now she has the leg up. Now she's got 2 kids from her concubine. She's starting to catch up with her. She's going to win. She's wrestling. She's winning. But God will not allow Rachel to think that she's in control, and allows Zilpah to conceive twice as well. So Bilhah has 2 kids, but guess what? Now Zilpah comes and she has 2 kids. And so the wrestling is really nullified here in this situation. And very interesting that she does not attribute to God the birth of Gad and Asher. She doesn't do that. She does not attribute her 2 kids to Gad and Asher. Now the other kids that she had, quite a few of them she attributes to God and praises God for what happens. But she doesn't want to do that here. She does not decide to do that. So Gad and Asher, what does that mean? So she says, I have had good fortune, and now I'm happy because women will call me happy. Good fortune, I have a child now, women will call me happy. This competition between the sisters was all about themselves, and yet God is using their petty and destructive ways really to bring about the 12 tribes of Israel, isn't it? It blows your mind, isn't it? That, you know, these women who are having this baby wrestling match kind of thing, they're not thinking, oh, I'm bringing about the 12 tribes of Israel. You know, that's not even in their thought process. But yet God is using these sins and this kind of selfishness and envy and anger, all the things that the Bible talks about are wrong, and saying that, you know what, I'm going to use this to create the nation of Israel. So, and it's interesting that God had Moses write this down in such a very, you know, enough details that you can see that these women are wrong. These women are not doing a good thing here. But yet, you know, we have this historical record, and Moses is saying, hey, Israel, nation of Israel, this is where you come from. Two women who married the same guy, who gave their concubine, you know, their servants as concubines to their husband, and he's having children. He had these 12 children, or at least 11 at this point. He's having these children with these women, and you're all coming from different places, and you're all coming from Jacob, though. But you know, here's the circumstances where you guys came about. It's very humbling, I think. It kind of fits in with God says, you know, you were really nothing, and then I chose you. It really shows you, like, yeah, this is crazy. Like, this is where the 12 tribes come from. You know, this goes to show you, like, if you were going to write a religious history, would you say that the founders of your religion were actually, you know, polygamous, which actually goes against Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, but he was polygamy. Into polygamy, these wives were just trying to get children because they envied each other. You know, you wouldn't write it this way. You create some kind of crazy story, you know, superhuman story or something. But that's not the truth. The truth is, the nation of Israel came about by these 5 people in one family. Yeah, crazy. Anyway, that's the story. That's up until verse 13. So come back for the next part, and we'll take a look at verses 14 through 21. And the story just keeps getting crazier. And we'll look at some more of that next time.